Why is depression comfortable? Well, a lot of people, when they feel depressed, I guess sometimes it goes into alleyways and trains of thought that would seek to tell them this is as good as it's going to get. And then they are forced to make decisions that most people don't take the right decisions. They go, well, I can either continue to be this way or I can not exist. And in some ways that people choose not to exist doesn't mean they kill themselves. It just means they just stop caring.
Whimsicast. Unpredictable encounters with voices from the unknown.
My name is Charlie. I am now 37 years old. I live in a little area called Lakeside in Richmond. It's an old neighborhood in revitalization mode, which is why I went there. I like old decrepit things that will at some point be made new, and so I want to be part of that. I have two sisters, both younger. And when I was younger, my father was a military man, which eventually I would become for a very short period of time. And so he wasn't around a lot. My mother was a nurse, and, she, being a single mom and, having a job, that's a tough job. Now that I'm older, I know it even more so. So she wasn't able to spend lots of time with us, and I think just in our upbringing, because even her family and his family was also military and or politicians. But we weren't so much, at least until later, and I had left the nest at this point. We weren't big on affection, but at the time that seemed normal. So we didn't really say, we said I love you, but in the robotic way. And so, yeah, we would have robotic sayings, but we didn't really hug a lot. And so I kind of grew up that way. We didn't eat dinners together very often. We went to our own rooms. I had a great childhood, though, and they were good parents. I loved them very much. It was just that was not part of it. So I was left to my own devices, and I think that's why I have such a vivid imagination, and that even as a kid, I would invent games to the point where people would open doors and laugh at me. And even when I think about it, it is hilarious. I would actually sit on a slip and slide for hours pretending I had been eaten by a whale. So if you looked in the window from the house, you'd see this little kid trying to crawl up a slip and slide against some force that didn't exist, and then he'd fling himself into the pool at the end because I was in the belly of a whale in the hot summers in Charleston, South Carolina. But, that was kind of my childhood. I had my select group of friends. It didn't change. I've always had a small group of friends. I can't handle a lot. It's part of my introvertedness. It was basically from elementary school to about graduation. It was the same group of people. Nobody left the group. Nobody got in the group. It was almost like that movie Lean on Me. It was just a small ragtag group of people who didn't seem to fit any. They were all squares with circle pegs, and nobody could get in it, so we were stuck together. And in fact, my best friend, his name was Eric. I first met him because I helped him to the school nurse because he was attempting to impress somebody by going on top of the monkey bars, and he fell off of it onto me as I was crossing below, and he started crying, and I could see he was skint up, and so I grabbed him by the elbow. I didn't know him yet, and he would, I helped him to the infirmary, if you will, and he just needed a Band-Aid, but we would become best friends. Shortly after that, we met this, his name was Daniel. He was a little bit overweight, and he came from an island in South Carolina. At the time, I don't know what it is now, it was known as the Poor Man's Island. And so I guess people had feelings and thoughts about who he was as far as just because of where he came from. He was a little overweight. He came from hunters. They lived in a trailer. But they were actually involved in chicken fighting. And they was kind of like a farm. And I guess for a lot of people, even if you're a guest, you're given a job for the farm's sake. And so mine involved the chickens, and they said they needed me to water the chickens. And so my first morning, I remember it was a lot of mist, and his dad was already drinking whiskey out on the deck and watching me in the early morning walking out with the hose. And I looked at this rooster. He was just sitting on top of his pen, just kind of doing that bopping head back and forth, wondering who I am and why I'm standing there. And it was like one of those little squeeze handle things, to get more distance. And I misunderstood the directive. They said water the chickens, so I thought, I'm going to water the chickens. Literally water on the chickens. And so I put the sprayer up to the chicken, and I pulled the trigger, and it hit the chicken right off the back of it, and he was just like flailing behind it. And the guy threw his cigarette down and came over, whiskey in hand still, and he kind of ripped the hose from me and pointed down at the water bottle, and he was like, He didn't really speak syllables. He just pointed at the watering desk, and I was like, oh, I got you. And Eric came from a rich family. In fact, his family, his dad was an architect, and they actually built an ark in their backyard. And when I graduated, they got in the ark, and I didn't see them again. They just went into the ocean in this massive boat, and he was his dad knew his stuff. That boat was beautiful, and they just went out. And then the only other people in our friend group for all those years was two twins, Kenneth and Keith, K and K, and they were sports people, but they were more like Dungeons and Dragons style. And we were too. So that was what we did on the weekends. We played Dungeons and Dragons, and we played bicycle tag, and the cool thing about Kenneth and Keith is they still got respect because they were really good soccer players. And since they lived together, they knew each other's movements to a T. So when you got them on the field, they didn't even need the rest of the soccer team because they had trained since they were babies, just kicking the ball back and forth so they could maneuver up and down the field. And so they were the ones that gave us some cool points when we absolutely needed them. Otherwise, we were regarded as like the ragtag group during most of our schools, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I loved it. I didn't want to be popular. I didn't like the social standing things and all that. Like, even in high school, if I wasn't able to sit with my friends, I was that one kid you see in the library or the bathroom eating his lunch in there. Like, I was like, I don't want to be part of this. I don't fit in with these people.
Hello, Whimsicast listeners. This is Steven Sanders, producer of Whimsicast. And I was just wondering if you guys had checked out the Facebook page yet, or the Instagram page, or perhaps the Twitter page. Whimsicast is on all three of those platforms. We're usually posting different stuff on all those things, so if you're into the show, the main reason I have those pages to begin with is so I can be in touch with you. So if you type in Whimsicast on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you're going to find us there. I was also really happy to receive 6 more iTunes reviews since the last show. If you haven't reviewed us yet, go ahead. And it doesn't even have to be a 5-star review. Maybe you think the show could be better in some way. That's the sort of thing that I'm looking forward to hearing back from you guys on. All right, anyways, let's get back to the story.
I worked at a grocery store for a little while, and then I got bored with that, and so I decided to try to best my father. My father was a Navy man, and so I was like, you know what? I'll take you out, Pop. I will go and join the Marines. I went to Parris Island, and within the first day, I realized I'd made a huge mistake. Like, I had joined the military for the wrong reason. I joined it to best my father, not for myself. And so I did not fall in. I was regarded quickly. My dad said the worst thing they could ever do the worst thing you could ever do is for people to know who you are. You want to just be a part of that big block of soldiers marching. If they know your name, you're going to have some trouble. And they knew Recruit Stokes pretty quickly because I did not fall in. And there's so many funny stories. I mean, I respect the military. And I was not a Christian. And I will tell you, every Sunday I was in church because those drill instructors were patrolling. It's like, so wait, if I go into that little building, the drill instructors can't get me? I'm like, yeah. So I was like, okay, well, I'm Episcopalian. Look, I just read the first church sign I saw. I was like, I'm Episcopalian. And they were like, okay, you can go to church. At one point, I actually tried to flee the island, which did not happen, but did not go well. I got caught, which is, some of the things I did, they could have thrown me in the brig, but they were very kind to me in certain respects. And there were good days. There were good days where I proved myself out of absolute fear, which is part of the thing. I remember my proudest achievement in the Marines was pugil stick fights. They had 3 days of pugil stick fights. And I remember this one day you get thrown into this kind of wood-chipped ring. And they hand you this thing they call a pugil stick. You might have seen it on American Gladiators, but it's supposed to be your rifle without ammunition, like hand to hand. And
it's a big Q-tip.
Yes, it's a big Q-tip. And they were supposed to be weighted fights, or at least they were guessing. They weren't putting on weighers. But I remember seeing the guy that they called in to fight me in the ring. And at this point, they did not like me. So they were going to make my life very difficult. And so they called in this hulk of a person. And, I'm wearing my helmet. I'm looking up, and it's just been a bad couple of weeks. I'm just like, oh, man, what's next? What is next? I was a scrawny dude. And I looked around the circle, and it was like in those movies where you see things going in slow motion. Like, those people were raising fists. Like, they wanted me to just die. Because I was causing them pain too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I wasn't a great recruit. So they were being punished sometimes because of me. And at that point, I realized that I had no friends or support within 100 miles or more. And this guy puts his helmet right up to my helmet, and he says, and he was kind for a moment. He said, sorry, Stokes, I've got to knock you out. Because if I do, I get a phone call home. And I was like, I totally understand that. And even then, I'm a nice guy. So I'm just like, well, I really wish the best for you. I really do. And it's just like I'm already ready to just start crying. And the guy blows the whistle. And I just did my natural inclination is to dive and jump. And so the guy was so big that, if he hit me, it was done. And so I just kept dodging, and to the point where now people are getting in anger. So now there's just one fish. It's almost like there's two. They're just like, somebody kill this man. And I remember just kind of going, well, I was a big D&D nerd. I was a big comic book nerd. And so I was just channeling every nerdness I could to figure out what would a person who cannot control this situation, what could they do? And so I was looking at the helmet while I was swinging, and instead of fighting the way they wanted you to, I twisted my pugil stick when I started getting a little bit slower, and I kind of lined it up to where it would go right under his jaw and like a pike. And so it came for me, and I twisted it last second and just kind of jerked real hard and quick underneath his jaw, knocked him right out. And then instead of just letting the fight go, they didn't blow the whistle, one. And two, I had entered this new, and I actually appreciate the military for teaching me I could do this. Mm-hmm. It's terrifying, but it's good to know you can. I remember just being in a blood rage, and I took his helmet off, and I positioned the Q-tip, as you call it, over his face, and I just started mashing it into his face, and they carted him off into like a bloody pulp. And the worst part was apparently, so they told me, some of the other people in our company, when he regained consciousness, they ended up torturing him some more for losing. Eventually I got an honorable discharge. Believe it or not, because I was going to eventually, at one point, I was like, I'm going to play by the rules. They're not going to let me out of here. They sent me to a guy that they called the Wizard. And at this point, I was just a jackass. I was used to being beat up, so that didn't bother me anymore. I was lumped, like, all over the place. I was like, I didn't care. And I went to the Wizard, and I looked at this guy they called the Wizard, and I said, let me guess, they call you the Wizard because, you have a college degree, so they don't understand anything you say, like you're that above them because you know something. He's like, no, I'm a psychologist. It sounds like you have avoidant personality disorder with paranoid effects. And because of that, and I realized it was true to a degree, and they asked if I would get therapy for it. I never did. Basically, the nuts and bolts, and it did carry into why I don't make friends easily, even though I love people, is because if someone were to get close to me, I don't mean physically, I mean relationally, I immediately withdraw because I go, in my mind, I have such low self-confidence in myself that you clearly want something from me.
Yeah.
I'm not worth it to you, so you're trying to take advantage and get something from me. So I now don't trust you for getting close to me. And to a lot of them, and ultimately the reason I got the discharge was because I'm a liability at that point in my life. Because if I'm supposed to be in this band of people, I signed up to work in a tank as a tank mechanic. There's no way. I don't know anything about tanks, cars, trucks. That was my dad. I was like, the only reason I even took that position was because I was watching X-Files at the time. It was the only job they had in Quantico. And I was like, well, maybe I can get to Quantico. I'll do the tank thing, but I'll meet some FBI agents. I'll get my foot in the door. They'll let me join the FBI. I'll hunt aliens. And that is the rest of my life story right there. That was the plan. Going into boot camp. That was a terrible plan.
It's Steven again, and I wanted to invite you all to check out our SoundCloud page, specifically the Whimsicast Season 1 soundtrack. This playlist includes all the music from all the fantastic producers that have allowed me to use this music in the podcast. Quite frankly, I've been blown away by how many people have contributed to this project. If you're enjoying the podcast right now, trust me when I tell you that it would not be anywhere as good as it is without this music. Do me a favor, check out the SoundCloud page by searching Whimsicast. If you hear a song that you like, download or purchase that song. It would really mean a lot. Now, back to the story.
So yeah, then I out on the streets from a bus station trying to figure out my next move, and I had a friend that used to work at the grocery store I worked at. He said he was going to become a famous artist and become a just big mogul in California. And he was going to VCU because they had a big art school there. And I liked to write. I was always creative. I said, well, I'll go there for an English degree, I guess. Let's see what happens, see what shakes out. Ultimately, I came to Richmond. He didn't make it. For anybody who, if you're familiar with VCU's art program, a lot of people don't make it. It's kind of like a boot camp for artists there. Mm-hmm. In fact, they have, I think, AFO, they call it. It's a strict, rough program. And he didn't make it. And he left and he disappeared. He actually went to California. Mm-hmm. Never saw him again. I don't know what happened to him.
Yeah.
But I stayed and I got my degree in English and I got published a few times and I'd like to get published some more. When I graduated, I was working at a coffee shop. I was managing a coffee shop and I loved it. The coffee shop got sold and they weren't going to use it as a coffee shop. So I then didn't have a job. I lost my long-term girlfriend and then my first student loan bill came in the mail. And now I'm living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. Not a good place, not a great place. Became very depressed because I kind of lost everything all at once. It was like just a clap of thunder and gone, everything gone. And I was faced with a reality, realizing that I had no one at that point, because a lot of people that are late bloomers like me, you get a girlfriend and everything in your life becomes that for that person. And so you end up pushing people away. And, so I had no friends. Then I didn't have the job. I didn't have any money. I had nothing. So I was like, for the first time, I was in this weird black void. I did contemplate doing things to myself, and I think everybody knows what that means. I got a job at Barnes & Noble, of all places. Barnes & Noble, because it's the only job I've ever had where I called and harassed them every day. I was like, I have an English degree. You guys need me. You sell books. I'm an English guy. I've read a lot of books. I'm like the guy for you. And I think the reason they hired me is because I called them every day for weeks, and I think they were just like, well, maybe he'll just wash out. We're tired of hearing this guy talking every day. So I got a job at Barnes & Noble, and it didn't take me long to meet this young lady. She was a little bit younger than me. And to me, she dressed kind of like a steampunk pirate. To this day, she says I was crazy that she never dressed like a pirate, but in my mind, she did. I didn't have any friends at the time, so she quickly became my friend. And it didn't take long for her to tell me that she wanted me to meet another friend of hers. And so one day she took me into the back, into the loading dock area, and there was a young man there, and his name was Ross. And he was checking in books, and I found out later he didn't want to meet me either. He was like, oh, well, I don't need any friends. And, so then I met Ross, and we kind of just traded meaningless jokes back and forth for a couple of weeks. And it finally came time for a man who doesn't know how to have friends thought, how do you make friends? I've never had to do it. How does somebody who hasn't made friends in their mid-20s make a friend? And I remember, and this was hilarious to me now, even then it was hilarious. I remember when I got his phone number. I'm a 20-some-year-old man, a man. I called him and I said, hey, Ross, the only thing I had was from when I was a kid. I said, hey, Ross, can you come out and play? And I just heard this cackling over the back of the phone. And I realized, did I just ask a grown-ass man if he could come out and play? And I was like, I don't know how to make friends anymore. And I never had to do it. But I remember the first time I invited him over, and it was just a comedy of errors. I introduced him to something called Adult Swim. He had never really witnessed what that was, and I was obsessed at the time with a show called Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Oh, yes. The first season of Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Oh, so fun. Yeah. So good. And so I hit a home run with that.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so he's watching this. We're both laughing. That's what friends do, right? They watch something and laugh together. And then I started hunting, going once again, unfortunately, back to being a kid, thinking about show and tell. It's like, what do I have in here I could show Ross to seem cool? And so Ross, once again, grown man, sitting on a sofa, watching Aqua Teen Hunger Force for the first time. I come into the room and I just wield this huge sharp sword and I thrust it right into his face. And I go, hey, look at this sword. And he's never hung out with me. He doesn't know me. He's alone in my apartment and now I have a sword on him. And he just looked terrified. Like I was just going to stab him right there. Like this would be the first and last everybody ever heard of Ross Wright. He came into this strange man's apartment and was stabbed to death. And I was like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And then I put the sword back in its sheath. And I was like, it's an heirloom of my family's. And it was like an old Marine cavalry sword. It did have some interesting historical. Mm-hmm. But Ross just looked terrified. And once again, I'm just like, I'm really having to learn how to make friends again. I don't know what to do. And going back to just having a childhood and a family life of no love, I didn't know what to do. And I was depressed. I had been drinking heavily, and I was on the path to self-destruction. I was on the way to dying, doing something to myself, killing myself. And but Ross and this girl, Amanda, put a small gleam in the back of my head in the darkness where I was like, well, there's something. This is something. Maybe it will keep me from the edge. It was all I had. And so at one point, Ross invited me over to his family's house, and I really didn't want to do that. And I remember opening the door, and his dad, never met him, never hardly knew. I don't even think I knew his name. But his name was Howard. Ross's mom's name was Pat, and he had two sisters as well, just like me, Becca and Debbie. And within seconds, they were hugging me. And it was like a cat wearing a tuxedo. I did not know what to do with affection, so I just looked so uncomfortable, like not telling them to get off me, but seizing and, becoming very taut in how I had my body, just so, they'd realize that this was not normal for me and I was not comfortable. And they immediately hugged me. They prayed with their dinner. I'd never witnessed that before. And it was just weird. I was like, you're praying to this God thing. You're hugging me. We're eating together. It's just like, I felt like I was in another country, another world, just looking at this family. And so, they became very quickly adopting me into their family. And they had lots of friends and lots of people in their life. But for some reason, and they didn't know the dark side of me. And they didn't for many years. Ross had an idea, but he didn't know. He didn't know where I was. But there was something in them that they just grabbed onto me, and I've even tried to avoid them, like on a holiday, like if it's Christmas or New Year's. In the past, I have tried to hide in my home. I would say, I'm going to go drive to my sister's. I wasn't going to go see my sisters. I just didn't want them to call me. I wanted to be alone on the holiday. I'm that kind of guy. And then they would find out, and they would literally drag me from my home into their home to celebrate and take pictures and open gifts. And it was just whether I wanted to or not. They would find me and hunt me like a dog to be a family, whether I was ready for it or not. And I think over the last couple of years, last 5-6 years, just felt like it was a godsend. And that was because also I am now a Christian. I was not a Christian. I identify with being a Christian. But they picked me. I don't know why. I don't know why at that point they did. And so they saved me in way more ways than one. And I can't really repay them for that. I remember seeing my family when everyone was still alive and looking at them, and there was a point of extreme sadness, actually, because they were different to me, because I had figured out what a family was and what having a spiritual life was like, and being infused with love. And I saw this detached family with addictions, same as me. I mean, I'm part of that. That's where I come from. That is my pool of people. I have addictions. I still do have addictions. Even though I'm in a much better place now, doesn't mean I don't go down the dark road of, well, what if I just wasn't around? That still plagues me. I think when you suffer that way, it's very hard to just escape it altogether. It stays with you, and I didn't want to be that. And, introduced this other way of living. And so, you want to see what happened to me out of college to now. I hit the factory reset button 2 or 3 times, wiping everything I'd ever known and rebuilding myself from a mid-20s to now a mid-30s person. And that is a lot of evolution in any human, to go, everything that you now know is now done. This is a new way. That's crazy. It boggles your head. And sometimes it's infuriating because you can't grasp these concepts. And so I guess I've been on a rapid rediscovery of myself over and over and over and over and over in this new world, and discovering that I love people even though they're terrified me at the same time. And so I think these are the most exciting years I've lived. What can I show you for it other than bits and pieces, of this beautiful, intricate picture? And I don't know what the picture looks like yet. It's just like, it's just crazy. And every day it's different. Even doing this, I would never say yes to this. I prefer to be at my home in a cave, and here I am talking to, just an hour ago, was a complete stranger to me. But yeah, I'm in a good place right now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Whimsicast, produced by Stephen R. Sanders. For more episodes of Whimsicast, go ahead and subscribe on iTunes or Google Play. You can also find us on Spreaker. Thanks.